During the creation of all these editors, and because there was so little memory in systems at the time, a 70s meme was born. Due to Ed being slower and having to swap out memory, so you never really knew what was in the buffer. And in some cases, the system ended up throwing out entire chunks of the buffer, losing your work. And with the slowness of the systems, it was almost impossible to tell when that would happen. So the very real meme, real programmers use cat as their editor, was born. So picking up where we left off with Ed in the mid-70s, 1975, in autumn, George Colouris, not satisfied with the state of Unix's raw mode terminal input, set to hacking together his own text editor to utilize more of the underlying features. This led to the development of the EM text editor, which excelled at showing the file as you're editing it on a monitor, or a video display unit as it was called at the time. Clearly a shot at Ed's difficulty, EM stood for Editor for Mortals. In 1976, George met PhD student Bill Joy while visiting UC Berkeley. Bill was working on a context-free parsing algorithm and a Pascal compiler at the time, but during all that, and after being forced to hack features into Ed, he tried George's EM. Bill convinced George to have a chat with systems support there at UC Berkeley to see if EM would be a viable solution for the department, but was shot down quickly after it was explained that the CPUs would just be overloaded by EM's overhead in raw mode. On the bright side, EM had 2 whole error messages coming from Ed. Even Ken Thompson himself blew it off, the author of Ed, as he didn't need to see the state of the file while editing. Bill also hacked together a temporary intermediary editor called EN that was a rewrite of Ed to include the features of EM. However, after George took a week-long vacation on the East Coast, he returned to find that Bill had taken the existing EM code and tacked on quite a few features that would eventually become EX, or extended, which included the undo feature. In 1977, X was rewritten to drop most of the legacy EM code, which cranked it up to version 1.1, and was released in the very first release of the Berkeley Software Distribution, or BSD, in 1978. It probably had nothing to do with the fact that Bill initially worked on, led, and created the first release of BSD. In 1979, EX 2.0 was released, but under a new name, VI. The name itself is derived from the word visual, of course being the first 2 letters. It barely fit into the memory of the PDP-1170 that it was designed for. It was a behemoth in size by standard set in the late 70s, but now it's considered one of the lightest, most functional editors of all time. Also around this time, Bill was working on another editor, BE, or B, that used the Smalltalk editing menu, which had visual editing, a scroll bar, and thumb bar. One of the 8 reported names for BE was Bill's editor. If the line in B was so long that it stretched off the screen, they just deleted it. Bill Joy continued leading development for VI until 1979, version 2.7. Later that year, in version 3.1, which was shipped with 3 BSD, it had exceeded the memory limits of the original PDP-11. Bill handed the reins over to Mary Ann Horton, but continued to contribute until 1980. In 1982, Bill left UC Berkeley to join Sun Microsystems, which led to its inclusion in AT&T's System 5 in January of 1983. This marked the departure of the shared code for VI. Independently, changes at UC Berkeley were also made, but the version number never exceeded 3.7. Over at AT&T and pretty much every other commercial Unix vendor like HP, IBM, and DEC, they kept their own version based on version 3.7, and quickly, one company's VI was incompatible with another's. In 1985, and because EN, EM, and VI were all derived from Unix's ED, distribution of the original source for all of them was forbidden. This gave Emacs some much-needed sun, and the opportunity to flourish. Micro Emacs was widely available. In 1987, a limited VI clone, STEVIE, the ST editor for VI enthusiasts, was born. It was a limited version of VI for the Atari ST that helped revitalize interest, written and released to the public by Tim Thompson. In 1988, Bram Moolenaar took the source for STEVIE and ported it to the Amiga, which marked the first release of Vim. It was also known as the WQ text editor at the time. Most folks take the acronym to mean VI improved, but originally it stood for VI Imitation. It took on the improved meaning later in 1993 around version 2. In 1990, a more faithful clone of VI was released by Steve Kirkendall that supported EX modes, visual commands, arrow keys, long line display, and a ton more that was targeted for usage on Minix. It was called Elvis. In 1991, Vim sees its first public release at version 1.14. In 1992, when Lynn and William Jollitz needed a text editor unencumbered by the original VI source to add to their BSD ports for 386 processors, they had a choice of many, but chose Elvis. Slackware still ships with Elvis today. In between all the VI hubbub, Vim saw its first official release to the public with its own Vim license, which is compatible with the GPL. And with a license like that, you know it was ported to absolutely every single device that had a display and keyboard, including DOS, BOS, macOS, Windows NT 3.1, Android, iOS, and of course, Linux. In 1994, Keith Bostick, a major player in the development of BSD and specifically for the 4.4 BSD Lite release, wanted the traditional VI experience, but without the thought of AT&T breathing down his neck for using it. So, using Elvis as a starting point, NVI was born, or New VI, as a bug-for-bug compatible VI clone. Even FreeBSD and NetBSD took on NVI eventually. NVI is a little different than its VI clone brethren in that it stores all edited text in a database. BSDs continue to use NVI today. In 1996, Vim 4 comes with a GUI. The mode can be accessed with the gvim or vim-g command. Fast forwarding a little bit to 2002, the original VI source code was released as open source. But prior to this, Gunnar Ritter was already illegally porting VI over to Linux and FreeBSD. His creation, traditional VI, still runs on many systems today and is now very legal and very cool. However, it never found its place in modern ecosystems. Fast forwarding again to 2016, VI celebrates its 40-year anniversary, and it's still shipped in Endeavour OS, just as it was. In 2020, Fedora switches from Vim to Nano for the default text editor in the Fedora 33 release. In 2021, Vim celebrates its 30-year anniversary. And in 2022, June 28th, Vim saw its latest release, 9.0. Now, that is the short and sweet history of VM. We glossed over a lot once we hit the 2000s, but mostly everybody that was going to adopt Vim had already adopted Vim.
Yep.
And so it's more just a feature list year over year at that point. And yes, we did not cover a lot of, well, some of especially the newer Vim offshoots like Neo Vim.
Oh, yeah. That's very new, though, I'll say. Yeah.
But there are plenty more topic shows to come over.
Maybe we may hit on it again. Yeah. It's hard to say.
I feel like a lot of those ones that you didn't hear about just yet are coming.
Yep. We got to save some for later.
Yeah. So, funnily enough, Ubuntu Server ships Vim by default. They symlink that to VI. So if you type in VI or Vim, you get Vim no matter what.
Yeah.
But this doesn't happen on the desktop.
It does not. And actually, most of the Ubuntu desktop flavors, with the exception of one, don't ship Vim.
Well, you have to enlighten me. What is the exception?
Okay, so maybe Ubuntu does ship Vim, and I happen to know from some of the maintainers there that that's their choice, their preference anyway.
Well, it's the best one, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you stepped in it now.
Oh, there's a lot of flame going on there, I'm sure. You also found something on Linux Mint, though, too.
Right. So I had just assumed that Linux Mint would have stayed with that default, but if most of the Ubuntu desktops don't ship Vim, then I had assumed Linux Mint wouldn't either, but they do. Vim is installed by default. I have a fresh install of 21, and I just thought, well, hey, it's either there or it's not. I'll just type in VI and see. Oh, there it was. Vim is there by default.
Oh, yeah. So the other one that we're testing out, Clear Linux for the month, right? And so I launched the terminal, and Vim is installed by default. And I know it is the default editor as well. Not just installed, it's the default editor and not something else. So I found that to be interesting.
And as I mentioned a little while ago in the history, EndeavourOS does ship not Vim,
but VI.
VI. So you do, man VI, and most distros will give you the Vim man page, not EndeavourOS. This is real true blue VI as far as I could tell.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have my Endeavour install anymore, but I will say, going back to Clear, VI launches Vim. So they're symlinked just like Ubuntu and server and whatnot. So
there really are a ton of improvements in Vim that you just don't get if you run VI. So I think it makes a whole lot of sense that everybody just does that.
I agree.
Everybody's muscle memory, especially if you're one of the older folks in Linux, if you've been on Linux for a long time, you got that VI muscle memory going.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense to give you the improvements, but you don't actually have to remember to type M, because that's what matters.
Well, so one of the other things that we haven't really touched on here is the navigation keys. And so the navigation keys will come up in other applications as well, sometimes. So like if you use Qt Browser and you want to navigate in Qt Browser, you'll use the HJKL, that are on your home row in a QWERTY keyboard to do some navigation, just like you do in Vim to up, page up, down, or, that, left and right, that sort of thing. And so
one thing I didn't mention, that maybe I should have, but so after that week-long vacation that George took when he came back, so Bill, who took EM, added on a bunch of features, ended up calling it EX. Bill was using a Siegler ADM-3A terminal, right? So this meant that if you look, you can go look that up on Wikipedia. You can see what the keyboard layout looks like, and if you look at where the tab key should have been, the escape key is there.
Yeah.
And this leads to making it very easy to hit the escape key to change your mode or to make quick changes or something like that. So that was different, but it's still a holdover. We still use escape today, even though it's a little further up on the keyboard. And the H, J, K, and L, as Dan said, those keys on the ADM-3A had arrows printed on them. So that particular terminal is what actually defined what you were going to use for navigate until we started adding arrow keys onto the keyboard, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you have a lot of folks that use Vim and VI that just will never remove their hands from the home row, and H, J, K, and L is right there on the home row. So as a touch typist, this makes navigation way more easy for you than removing your hand and, clicking on the arrow keys and then finding the home row again.
So you mentioned the placement of escape on that terminal keyboard. One of the very, very, very popular changes to get into command mode is to use caps lock. Because a lot of people don't use caps lock generally. They don't need the caps on unless you're, well, I guess you're a database editor or your database administrator, right?
Right. Or you're screaming on the internet, right? Like that's very important as well.
So caps lock is the change for your command mode, and that is just about where escape would have been on that terminal.
I did not know. Wait, so you're telling me that I can get into Vim now and hit caps lock and that would change?
No. I think you have to edit the Vim configuration. But that's one of the very popular changes that people make. And that's why, because that's where they want their hand to be, right there on that home row area. Yeah,
because, speaking of home row, it's very difficult to hit the escape key with a pinky. I mean, that you have to remove, again, like the arrows, you have to remove your hand from the home row to hit the escape key to change your mode. Whereas with caps lock, it's just there to the left of the home row.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. I did not know that. Knowing
very
that
popular
now,
change.
It makes me want to make sure that changes in every, because I'll end up in VI sometimes when there's no other, like, what is it? When you're making changes to sudo, you use, I forget what the command is now.
VI sudo.
Vi sudo.
Yep.
And I think some distributions give you the option to, like, you can choose nano to do that with, but if you're on a distribution that doesn't give you the choice, you're just dropped into VI. And so having that there and having the caps be your mode changer makes a whole lot of sense. So maybe I will figure out how to do that.
It takes a little editing to do in your config file, but I mean, it's a whole new world when you do it.
Man.